welcome to Embracing Shadow IT with Alex Hoff. A little bit about us, Auvik. We are a cloud-based network management solution focused on MSPs and corporate IT environments. We've been at this journey for a little over 8 years. We have well north of 2,000 customers around the world. And a little fun fact about Auvik, people always ask, what is an Auvik? What's the name? So then Auvik, if you look above our logo, you'll see that there's a purple swoosh. That purple swoosh is actually an igloo, and an Auvik is an Inuit word for a building block of an igloo. You know, so we played hard on that Canadiana theme. We've got a polar bear mascot named Nanook. A little bit about myself. I'm one of the co-founders here at Auvik. As I said, we've been at this journey for a little over 8 years. I've got the Lego blocks to prove it. Fun little way to celebrate the journey that we've been on. But largely, my role here is to help figure out our long-term product strategy, think about the emerging trends, the headwinds, the tailwinds, and just work with our customers and partners to figure out how to best utilize our solutions. So historically, when I used to go to live speaking events, I'd have a very different tone. I used to talk about the fear of shadow IT. I used to talk about how shadow IT would be viewed as a bad thing. And often it was, because the way we looked at shadow IT was it created risk. We looked at our environment as a closed ecosystem, from PCs to office security to physical networks to controlling the applications that were on these machines, because all we wanted to do was make sure we mitigated that risk, whether that be uptime and availability risk, security risk. Ultimately, the role of IT was to improve and increase productivity, and anything that got in our way of that we'd be scared about that. We'd be like, oh, bad, you know, those aren't good things. But then the world changed. And so let's talk about some of those risks. So one of my favorite stories, I've got lots of great stories from customers over the years, and I kind of put them into 4 buckets here. So people think about unmanaged switches as annoyances. And you know what? In practical terms, they are. These things hide behind cubicle walls. They often are placed there by employees because they just needed to add another port. And instead of contacting the IT organization to add another, run back to the main switch stack, we just put this device in there, and often causes performance bottlenecks like 10 meg half duplex cheap switches you picked up off eBay, or the fact that these things will fail and no one has any idea that they were there as they're trying to troubleshoot a problem, and it just decreases the mean time to resolution. So don't love managed switches, but they serve a purpose. It's one of those things that's better when we, as IT professionals, are aware of them and ideally can design around them and find a better solution. Private access points, classic example of an individual saying, hey, you know what? I've got this challenge that on this side of the building, there's a really poor Wi-Fi signal. So you know what, don't worry, I'm not gonna bother the IT team. I know they're super busy. I'm gonna hop out to Best Buy. I'm gonna grab an access point, I'm gonna plug it in, solve my problem. The problem with a private access point is that they can run a DHCP server, which can wreak havoc on the connectivity of your other employees on your network. The other issue is that they could, if misconfigured, they could open up a security risk. The main Wi-Fi network may be secured properly, WPA2 enterprise, but the private access point could just be open, which inadvertently creates a backdoor on the network. That would be bad. Another fun topic is hidden switches. And people might be wondering, what do you mean by a hidden switch? And often these are situations where a new IT professional comes in, a new managed service provider, what have you, comes into an environment where they're not quite sure what the office looks like. They do the walkthrough, they get a sense for what's going on. Okay, sure, all makes sense. But lo and behold, through the use of discovery tools or bad luck, they discover that previous individual had put a bunch of switches and ceiling tiles to create a long cable run. They were too cheap to run a fiber line from point A to point B in this office. So they just put switches and they daisy chain them through the office. Oops, and these things can be really bad. Now that might be an extreme example, while true, but a more traditional example is just finding another networking closet that you weren't aware of because it's buried somewhere in the basement that you had no idea even existed. And so if you think about these things, they create risk because we don't understand how old they are, what's their configuration, what happens when they fail. You're spending countless stressful minutes or even hours trying to figure out what's going on to try and solve the problem. Another example is unauthorized wireless devices. And so you think about the office environment as PCs, printers, that kind of thing. But over time, many things are emerging on the network. Wireless cameras for security reasons, fingerprint sensors, even IoT light bulbs. In fact, a story I heard from one of our customers was really around an office space, a company who's leasing office, just like almost everybody. And building maintenance had come in with this thesis that they wanted to minimize the number of truck rolls they had to do to maintain the office. So they put these IoT light bulbs in one evening. And the idea there is when these things fail, when they start producing light, you'll get an alert, and then you can decide when to come out and replace them. That makes logical sense. Same role as an MSP trying to reduce downtime. These building managers are trying to maximize the use of their resources. The challenge with these IoT light bulbs, as the case may be, was that the network, these IoT devices consumed all the IP addresses on the network, causing a inadvertent denial of service attack. So when employees came in the next day, they tried to log onto the network, but they couldn't because all the IP addresses were consumed by these light bulbs. It's kind of a classic oops. But this is the type of shadow IT that IT professionals loathe. It just gets in their way of doing their main job, which is thinking about new ways to help improve productivity of the team rather than reacting to troubleshooting problems. So that was the world, and then the world changed. Everyone was forced to go home, and I would say that organizations were bucketized to two different camps. Didn't mean anything to everybody. Largely you had organizations, much like Auvik ourselves, kind of born in the cloud, all had laptops to begin with. It was super easy for us to just pick up the next day, go home, and business as usual. And then there was the class of organization that maybe had a lot more desktops. They had to go procure a bunch of laptops. They had to set VPNs up for their employees to access on-premise software. And I would say that the IT professionals that were taking care of their teams during this were busting their butts trying to make sure that everyone had what they need to do their job in a super stressful environment. But it caused a lot of stress for organizations. Fundamentally, IT's role has changed. So what used to be really about building systems and software to help drive employee productivity, now it's a little bit different. What systems need to be in place to drive productivity, not just about the software, but the end-to-end system? How do we keep data safe? And what's always been true? The role of IT is to enable everyone to get their work done in a productive manner. So shadow IT, it's everywhere, especially with the world the way it is now. I think that the thing you have to think about is, how do you embrace shadow IT? How do you look at it in a positive manner rather than in a negative manner? So let's talk about just a couple different scenarios that we've seen over the years and how you could think about things a little bit differently. So historically, the network. We're a networking company. I've been in the networking space for the better part of my career. The network was really this walled garden that we thought of. We put a firewall for perimeter control. We put network access control tools in place to manage and detect devices coming onto the network. We'd secure the Wi-Fi, and everything was about trying to secure and control the network. Many organizations, and in fact, I even advocate for this, go so far as to mitigate east-west traffic. And for those that don't really know what that means, it's saying that if I'm connected to the network, I can't see any of my peers on the network. The only things that I can see are the internet. And you know why that's a good thing? It's because of CryptoLock or malware. If a network gets infected, you want to prevent the proliferation of these bad actors. And the way they do that is they get into my machine and they look across trying to find other machines that they can infect. But if you prevent that, it's a really good thing. So, the world of IT was really about trying to find ways to lock down and secure the network. Well, now, problem solved, right? We went home. We are all virtual. We're all working remote. We're not even on the physical network. It's all virtual. Your data ideally is all in the cloud. Maybe you're using your VPN to access the data, but we're doing things to segregate and limit what machines you can access. I talked about in the previous slide there about east-west traffic mitigation. Well, same thing is true, right? If I'm on the VPN or I'm at home, the only machines I can talk to are my peers at home, the iPads, the TVs, what have you, not the CFO's machine. I can't access that machine anymore because it's in a completely different network. So that's interesting. But now we have a new set of problems. We have to talk about the internet being secure. Are you running proper security on your Wi-Fi? Is your home residential router up to date? Most of you are probably shrugging your shoulders saying, well, I don't know, I've never really thought about that. And so, rather than trying to control and limit the environment, IT, historical ways, saying, oh, no, we're going to control it and lock it all down, embrace it. Accept the fact that some of your employees may be mooching internet off their neighbor. Hey, that's a true story with some of our team members. Embrace that and say, well, how do we think about a different strategy? Maybe using SD-WAN technology, shipping out routers to some of your key employees. Maybe think about rolling out a VPN technology to allow your employees to connect over the top in a secure fashion, rather than trying to secure the underlying transport layer. So just, again, think about it a little bit differently, embrace the risk, and find a way to solve it. Again, historically, we always talk about patching. My example of CryptoLocker malware, that's usually a piece of malicious software that's taking advantage of a vulnerability in software, whether it be in your operating system, in an application, and sometimes even the network. So whether it be a firewall that may potentially have a bad CVE, you still had to think about the network as something you had to patch and keep up to date. Now, maybe it's a little bit less important when we were sitting at home, but we still always have to keep these devices up to date. In fact, both Cisco and Fortinet have had in the past very nasty vulnerabilities. And it's one of these things that as we've shifted to a distributed workforce, we still need to make sure that these VPNs are secure, that the machines cannot be compromised via some malicious actors taking control of the firewall. Now as we think about, again, patching and firmware and something getting compromised, how about we take a little bit of step back? When someone's trying to take control of a machine, trying to compromise it, they're really trying to get access to data or lock you down to hurt your productivity. Flip this around again. If someone were to take control of my machine, I could wipe it tomorrow because I store nothing on it. Everything in our organization sits in the cloud. If I've downloaded something, maybe it's just because I'm doing some offline work, but largely there's no data that I store here. Now, many of you are saying, well, hey, that doesn't apply to us. But there are transitional strategies if you're not all born in the cloud with SaaS applications and Office 365 or G Drive. You can think about how do you take your on-premise servers, and I would say is this whole kind of distributed work push caused by COVID has caused us to rethink where our data lives. If it's not in the cloud today, we're thinking about how do we move it to the cloud more aggressively. And if that just means taking those servers and hosting them in Azure, great, do that, right? Because you can then control access and limit who can get to it. Again, hey, we built a business around network performance monitoring. And I think we've done a fairly good job of making it really easy to understand that. But now it's a different thing. We used to think about the network, again, as that transport layer to help me as the user connect to the application. And I wanted to make sure that that transport layer, that connectivity was performant. I want to make sure there was no bottlenecks, no major issues. And yeah, that's a thing. But now we're having to re-examine what we are looking at. It's less about the switch connectivity or the Wi-Fi speed at the office. It's about that user sitting at home on their laptop at the kitchen table, connected to their own Wi-Fi, connected to their own equipment, connected to the internet connection that they pay for out of their own pocket. And because these are no longer environments that are controlled by IT, the IT people, professionals, are trying to think about the different techniques and tools that we're going to have to use in order to help troubleshoot. Do you want your team member, your employee, to be calling their ISP for 2 hours in the middle of the day to try and figure out what's going on with the internet? No. Ideally, we'd be able to figure out and make recommendation as to what's going on. Maybe you need to recommend they upgrade from the 5 meg service to a 100 meg service, whatever. But it's about getting that right data and helping these users be empowered to solve the problems themselves. Everyone thinks about security as layers at the end. And when I think of layers at the end, I always think of Shrek. It's all about layers, right? When it starts with the machine, the PC, the software has to be patched. Number one thing, if you don't have a patch strategy in place, please go solve that. You think about antivirus, more detect malware as it's being installed. But then we have the evolution of endpoint EDR solutions. Those are trying to detect malicious behavior while they might not have the signature yet. Then on the reactive side, we have tools like backup disaster recovery. We have cloud backup disaster recovery. We have all these different layers to mitigate risk. And these are all great, right? We have tools on the network to detect new devices like ourselves. But all these things were there to help prevent malicious behavior and mitigate that risk. And I would say now things aren't radically different, We still need to patch the devices. We still need to be aware of what's on the network. We still need to know what's using our resources. You still need backup, but you need to think of backup as a different thing. So, we talk a lot about on-premise servers. Now, think about more about a backup strategy for SaaS. How do you make sure that you have the right backups in place to make sure if someone does something silly in Salesforce or Office 365, you don't blow away a ton of history. You need to be able to roll back. It happens. It's happened to us with bad configuration of software tools. It's going to happen. So, always have these strategies and think about it as the blast radius, right? How do you minimize that blast radius? I talked about the network, as I said, with east-west traffic mitigation. That's one strategy, but SaaS tools is another. And when you think about security, you think about people. I'm not an expert in, phishing and training, all that stuff, but I do know that people were super distracted over the last 3 to 6 months with so much going on in the world, rapid shift to work from home, total chaos, maybe not a perfect work environment, kids running around. Yeah, we were distracted. And then that was often viewed as an opportunity by malicious actors to take advantage of it. Like Google was blocking something like 240 million phishing emails a day in April. And we saw that mobile phishing was up 37% in the first quarter compared to last year. That's nasty. And when you let your guard down, that's when you can be compromised. But if you've taken some of the steps I've kind of outlined before, you can limit that blast radius. But what I'm getting at here is, even though it's super stressful, there's still opportunities to train. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but we run phishing campaigns to our own employees. We try and make sure that we can, sharpen the lens, make sure that we're looking out for those weird emails, don't click those links. But also, we as an organization believe in zero trust. We believe that you need Duo, you need SAML, you need all sorts of these tools to make sure we can understand who is authenticating to the network. So let's switch gears a little bit. I'll take it a little bit more to my area of expertise, talking about networking. And often when I think about networking, it's really about the last mile. Whether you were in the office, it was the connection to the PC, it was the, in your home, it's your laptop connecting to Wi-Fi. We saw all sorts of crazy stuff as people moved remote. We saw subnets from the office matching the subnets at home, preventing connectivity. We saw people running speed tests, or IT professionals explaining to users how to run a speed test to see if they're, they have the right throughput on their modem, or finding out that, their kids might be on 3 or 4 different screens streaming Netflix. You need to make sure you have enough bandwidth. The old classic, got to reboot the modem, right? To the extent you could just pop up a message on the screen every time something went wrong and say, hey, user, go reboot your modem. That solved 90% of the problems. Heck, when I call into my ISP, that's the first thing they recommend. Often I found that personally, whenever I had a bad Zoom call, it was always with me being too far away from my access point. I might be out on my deck trying to, enjoy some sun while working, but I was too far away, and so the signal to noise ratio was too high. So there's all sorts of these new things that we have to look at, and you got to think about from the user's perspective, what's that last mile, and what are some of the tools that we can put in place to capture the right information to solve these issues. I've talked a lot about VPNs. If you're not using a VPN to access core network resources, I would highly recommend it. But then you have to think about monitoring them. Most of the vendors did a great job at unlocking the software restraints through COVID. I mean, everyone was super stressed, no point doing that, but there were still some hardware limitations they had to look at. So one of the things to look at is, what traffic is flowing through the network. If you've got a split tunnel, that means some of your traffic from the PC is going out to the network, some is going to the office. You don't want 100% going to the office, because that's just sending your streaming traffic through there. It's okay if they're streaming, but you don't need to waste resources from your firewall and your internet provider to have that go to your office and out to the internet again. So there's ways you can use traffic insights from Auvik to help try and pinpoint these issues. With VPN monitoring, as I mentioned, you got to make sure how many sessions you have. So you want customizable alerting around that, trying to understand how many sessions are active and what you can do about that. If you don't have a network monitoring or management solution in place, I'd highly recommend you check us out. We offer a 14-day free trial to give you real-time visibility and topology mapping, help you understand issues that might be occurring on your network on-premise or even with your distributed employees, trying to pinpoint performance bottlenecks or interesting traffic trends that are occurring. So if you leave with one thing here, I would say is my overarching theme of this presentation is think about securing the experience rather than controlling the environment. IT has historically think about locking down the underlying infrastructure, but rather I think we need to think about, hey, what is that end-to-end user experience, and how can we ensure that if we can't control the infrastructure, that we can control and secure that experience. Thank you very much. And then if you feel like checking out Auvik, go to auvik.com/try now for a 14-day free trial. Thank you very much.